Hello, and welcome to the MMA Mic Drop podcast. This is episode number 8. My name is Jade Bunke, and I am with a very special guest today. I am with the legendary senior editor at Sherdog.com and co-host of the Shillin' and Duffy show, Ben Duffy. Ben, what an honor it is to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks for that extremely gracious introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. As soon as you mentioned that you were doing a podcast, I expressed my interest in coming on. I don't know how it took us 8 episodes to get me here, but better late than never. I'm very excited.
Yeah, no, we are so excited to have you here. And for those of you who are used to watching our podcast, I know we only have 8 of them. We are the fastest growing new MMA podcast in the world right now. So thank you all for watching. Please click like, subscribe, and so forth. And you might be used to seeing Milo Mcgregor. He will join us later to give us his picks, because what we're going to do is we're going to construct the ideal UFC 300 fight card. Now, what Ben and I are going to do is we're going to do something that's going to be realistic, what we think the UFC should do and can do. So we have to take everything into proper context. What fights are going down right now? What fights are expected to happen later in the year? When we get to Milo, he might put John Jones versus Weili. We don't know what he's going to do. It might be a little wild, but at least we know Ben and I are going to try to do something that the UFC can do. We are going to start with the prelim. What is our featured prelim? And then we're going to go through and we're going to build the UFC 300 card. And Dana White just announced 3 fights. I think those are going to be prelim fights, and we're going to talk about that later. Ben, by his nonverbal cues, suggests he might think those are actually main card fights. So we're gonna see. So right away, with that said, Ben, what would be your featured prelim fight at UFC 300?
Well, there's a couple things you want in your featured prelim, because that's the fight where as soon as it's done, you've got the stand up with Dana White and Joe Rogan yelling at you about why you need to order the pay-per-view. It's never fun for them to do that after a crappy fight. You also want someone that has some name value with the casual fan. My co-host Keith Shillin always points out the UFC should always do its booking looking to serve the casual fan, because you and I are going to watch UFC 300 no matter what's on it. Well, one, it's my job, but 2, even if not, I'd be going to the wings and boobs or something to watch it. But at any rate, you want something that will serve the fan. So recognizable names, a fight that's likely to be either an absolute war or at least a quick finish, but not such a big name that you can't justify not putting them on the main card. So I've got Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa.
Woo! Wow, coming out the gate. I like, yeah.
I'm making the best card that is realistic to do. Like, I can't say Patricio Pitbull, comes over to the UFC, because there's no reason to believe that. But going with, the 3 fights that we've already been told are on this card, plus the heavy implication that the sport's biggest star really wants to be on this card, I built the best lineup I could around that.
Well, and I have Khamzat Chimaev on the fight card, but he's not on the prelims, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But I think that I like that. I think that's smart. I think you do want to come out firing. You need to get everybody to tune in. You need to be able to sell the pay-per-view buy. And with that in mind, I did something a little bit differently. I used a big name, and I used somebody who can finish a fight real quickly. On one end, I have Cyril Gane. On the other end, I have Sergey Pavlovich. Because I think Pavlovich probably finishes that in the first round, and Cyril Gane has the bigger name right now. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Who has the bigger name right now? I mean, Sergey was surging before he ran into Tom Aspinall.
Again, from the point of view of the casual, Gane has headlined multiple events. He's going to be the one whose face, name are more recognizable, even if you and I both think the actual matchup might favor Pavlovich.
Exactly. And that's where I think it's interesting, right? You get that somebody with big name value, and he gets smashed in the first round, which, may or may not happen. Who knows? But now one thing this was announced yesterday. Paulo Costa is fighting Robert Whittaker now at UFC 297. With that in mind, do you have a replacement for Khamzat?
Doesn't matter. That's almost exactly 3 months. he'll make the turnaround.
Oh, you know what? That's actually a good point. Good point. Okay.
Because I got more than one fighter on this card that is fighting at UFC 297. It's 3 months, unless there's a significant injury, unless they get knocked out, they get a bad cut, they'll fight 3 months from now. Because the other thing is, everyone's going to want to be on this card.
That's correct. Everybody. So I think you'll see injured fighters, people that normally would want to take some time off. They're going to want to jump on. I mean, as long as the injury's not too bad, right? I mean, if somebody's a little banged up, they're not going to want to take the time off too.
And at least one fighter from the main card, like the real main card of UFC 300, is going to fall off less than a month from the fight, and 80 hands are going to go straight into the air.
Absolutely. No, good point. Well, I like that. So we're coming strong right out the gate. So Ben, now we're going to kick off the main event. You set the bar high. You got the casuals to tune in. You got to keep the hardcore fans excited. Who's opening the card?
I'm going to take one of the 3 bouts that Dana White announced this week. I'm going to have former bantamweight champ Aljamain Sterling making his featherweight debut against Calvin Kattar.
Wow. Okay. So that's going to be on the main card. Okay.
And he is a recent former champ, and a guy that until fairly recently was at least in the conversation of how close is he to the greatest bantamweight of all time. You can't put that guy in the prelims.
That's a fair point. And it's funny because when I was thinking, about these fights that were announced, I'm thinking, okay, maybe these are prelims, but then it's, I was battling with that same thing. And, he was just the champ, and he was arguably the best bantamweight of all time as well, just recently, or in that conversation. So that makes sense. Now, go ahead.
And the other thing is, you can't put a fight that is potentially a title eliminator on the prelims, because if Sterling goes out and he does to him what he did to Corey Sandhagen, i.e. fold his laundry for him with him still in it, they might, Sterling will not be far down the phone list for a title shot at 145. You got to give that guy some shine.
You're right. Now what's interesting, so I'm going with somebody from your prelim. I'm taking Khamzat Chimaev. Now, originally, I was going to put him against Robert Whittaker just because of name value, but Whittaker, it was announced yesterday that he is fighting at UFC 297. That's the one in Anaheim, right? I'm actually going to be at that one, so I'm pretty happy about these. I'm super stoked about that. So I'm actually happy that he's fighting at an event that I'm going to attend. With that said, I'm going to match him up against Brendan Allen. I think Brendan Allen is right there. He's number 8. He doesn't have the sizzle. And after the last Brendan Allen fight, I wanted to match him up against Khamzat, because if he beats Khamzat, I mean, he's a superstar. If Khamzat beats him, his brand value continues to rise. But he doesn't have the sizzle. What's your thoughts? Critique it, rip it apart, or agree?
I love it as a fight, and I'm glad you're going to the Anaheim show. Whittaker is the goodest of good dudes. Awesome. Allen is also on my lineup, so we'll talk about him a little later. But I love yours as a fight. I love it as a piece of matchmaking. I don't think we're having a contest here for who's got the better card, but I like that one just as well as my main card opener.
Awesome. Okay, so we've already set the bar pretty high out the gate. What's your second fight on the card?
It is the other one, another of the ones that Dana White announced this week. It is Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. Again, if Prochazka wasn't so cool, this would be a title fight. But, it is at the very least definitively a title eliminator. It's got to be on the main card. And I can't put it any higher than this because of what I've got coming in the next 3 fights. So it is Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic at light heavyweight.
Well, it's funny. Before Dana White mentioned that was actually a matchup that I had that I was going to select, but I was going to put it on the prelim, and you'll see why what I'm doing later. But I think that's a great matchup, and it was funny because they were talking about that in social media, Yuri and Rakic, and I was hoping it would land on the Anaheim card as well. I wanted that one to be my personal UFC 300. But wow, that one's going to be fire. Now, with that said,
it might be fire.
Yeah.
The question will be, whether it turns into a Yuri Prochazka fight or an Alexander Rakic fight, because their comfort zones are extremely different.
And that's where I'm hoping Yuri's going to push the pace on that. But yeah, a Rakic fight by itself, is kind of hit or miss.
Unless you like 200 leg kicks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Playing it safe on the outside, and then well, I'm going with the second one. I'm going with one of the biggest stars in the UFC who's in no man's land. I'm going with Max Holloway, and I'm matching him up against. And you might have to help me pronounce his name because I always mess it up. If he wins, he's fighting against Arnold Allen. I'm going with Movsar Evloev. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Movsar Evloev? Yeah. Got it.
Okay. Yeah, because he will be undefeated if he beats Arnold Allen at that particular fight. I think that's an incredible fight. And then if he loses, I would match Max Holloway up against Giga. I'd like a stand-up war. I mean, it's really to see Max Holloway use his name. He will get all the casuals and the hardcores.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that fight?
I love any of those permutations, and if not for the fact that Holloway and Allen had fought recently, I would have just said Holloway against the winner of Allen versus Evloev.
Exactly.
Yeah, because Movsar Evloev, he's undefeated, and I feel as though, not that he's not he's a contender now, not even future contender, but a guy that's going to be a contender for the foreseeable future because he's so young, but him being undersized, I feel like it's got to catch up to him at some point, and if it doesn't catch up to him against Max Holloway, then I'm wrong in a lot of my assumptions, and this guy might be future champ.
I mean, if you beat Max Holloway, you have the potential to be future champ. I mean, that is the measuring stick. And it's funny about this fight because, UFC 300, you want action. Max Holloway is going to deliver action. If he, if he beats Max Holloway, he's the real deal. If not, Max Holloway is probably going to land about 400 strikes on him. And that's going to be good viewing, right? So if it's a mismatch, it's a fun mismatch for the viewers.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're getting into, some of the deep waters here. We're getting in third. We're going third from the top. Who do you have? Now this has got to be big, Ben. So you've already set the stage. You already set the bar pretty high.
This is a tentpole pay-per-view for the UFC, so it needs to have at least 2 title fights. I've got a title fight right here in Alexa Grasso versus Weili Zhang for the flyweight title. Ooh. They talked about it already on social media this week.
Wow.
Zhang called Grasso, respectfully called Grasso out on social media, said, I'd love to fight you. Grasso was like, wow, great. You come into flyweight? Give me that.
Wow. You know what? Honestly, that was one I didn't even think of. And I wasn't even, wow, you put that, and that's the fight where you're trying to get a 2-division champ. That's an appropriate fight that high up. I'm speechless. I didn't even think about that.
On the one side, well, whoever wins that fight has a pretty good case at being considered the top pound for pound woman in the sport. No, it's either Grasso having beaten dominant champions in her last 3 fights, or Zhang being a 2-division champ. The stakes couldn't get much higher in the post-Nunes era.
Wow. See, this is why they call you the great Ben Duffy, because that wasn't even on my radar, and now I'm super amped about a fight that I didn't even think about. So that is awesome. That gets me pretty excited. All right, so third from the top. Again, you have to have a champ, but I'm not going. I have to have a title fight, but I'm going with a different title fight. But the belt's not going to be on the line. I'm going with Justin Gaethje versus Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan has not earned the right to go for the BMF title. I don't think so, right? You got to earn that. That's like Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway. But with that said, that's a fight I want to see. Justin Gaethje versus Arman Tsarukyan, because we know, or we think, Charles Oliveira is going to be next for the title shot.
Yeah.
And originally I was thinking Dustin Poirier versus Tsarukyan, but I think Justin Gaethje, UFC 500, or excuse me, 300, UFC 300. That's how excited I am. I'm inflating the number of the card. UFC 300. It's got to deliver violence. Justin Gaethje will deliver violence, and got against Arman Tsarukyan, coming off that devastating win. Yeah, I think that would be insane.
I agree. And if Tsarukyan can get the win and it's any kind of entertaining, that puts him over in a huge way. And you've got to put some of these new stars over because
yes,
you've got a core of stars that have been knocking each other off in that division for several years now, and they're all getting old. Like, you can argue that Olivera, Chandler, Gaethje, Poirier, they might all be fading, and we just can't tell because they've been mostly fighting each other for the last couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And all eyes are going to be on that. So if Justin Gaethje wins, he'd probably do it in spectacular fashion. And, and to your point, if Tsarukyan wins, now he's going to be a fan favorite among the casuals because, wow, he just beat Justin Gaethje. And Justin Gaethje's brand value right now could not be higher. So you got to use him on this card, I think. All right. So coming up next, so now we're in the co-main event. Ben, expectations are really high now. What are you going to do?
I am putting the winner of Sean Strickland and Dricus Du Plessis against Brendan Allen.
Really? Brendan Allen gets the co-main event. Wow.
6-fight win streak. I've had to kind of revise my thinking about the guy. And here I was being realistic to what I think the UFC would be more likely to do. If I were just making the card and I were king of the world, I'd put Grasso versus Zhang in the co-main and put the Strickland DDP winner versus Allen, third down, just because I think the stakes are higher in the women's fight in this particular case. But they tend to go with, unless you've got a ridiculously dominant champ, they tend to go with the men higher and the heavier fighters higher. So,
yeah, and Brendan Allen is right there. And the reason why I matched him up with Hazmat is I just don't think he has enough buy-in from the casuals yet. He will. I think he will, but I love that fight. I mean, the winner, give him a title shot next. I mean, he is right there because, when you look at the middleweight division, you got a lot of the older fighters as well, like Jared Cannonier, Marvin Vittori, that are high up on the rankings. And Brendan Allen's is that next guy who's a younger guy outside of Dricus Du Plessis, that hasn't, fought for a title, I would say. So,
right. And there are a couple guys kind of puttering around like, Vitor Petrino, but he's like just 26 years old. He's got time.
He needs some fights. He needs,
yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so my co-main event, I am going with Islam versus Charles Oliveira as the co-main.
Dude, do it. I love it. I was incredibly pumped for their first fight, and the fans were incredibly pumped for the first one. The preview for that particular pay-per-view is still the most viewed episode in the history of the Shillen and Duffy show.
Yeah, and you know what? At that time, I've never been more excited for a fight at that time than that fight. Across all divisions, if you can make one fight, that was the one. Sure. And I think the excitement has fallen off a little bit, but one of the things, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well. I think Charles Oliveira welcomed Islam to the ground too comfortably. And I think because, hey, I'm Charles Oliveira, I can submit anybody from the ground. It's not only that Dagestani, top heavy wrestling is different. It's Islam's Dagestani wrestling is different. Yes. And I think Oliveira comes out with a different game plan. And I think it's up in the air who could win. With that said, what are your thoughts on that?
I favored Islam Makhachev going into their first fight, and it played out more or less like I, thought it would. Like, not to toot my own horn, like that was the obvious dynamic there. The best wrestler in the division against a guy who maybe was a little too comfortable with his grappling. I don't know who wins that rematch, but I know it's unlikely to look exactly the same. Right now, Charles Oliveira is with just an incredible camp between having, Georgie Makako as his longtime head coach and then being with Shooter Box Diego Lima. They're going to come up with a plan to adjust for what went wrong in the first fight. It may still not be enough. Islam Makhachev, it might not be enough. I mean, 3 or 4 years from now, we might be calling Islam Makhachev the greatest lightweight of all time. It may just not be enough, but they're going to give it their damnedest.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good insight. Yeah. I think it will look different. It will look differently. How to what extent? I mean, who really knows, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now we're to the main event. I think I know where you're going, but I'm not sure. So who would you select for the main event?
Well, the UFC is still largely married to the idea that every pay-per-view has to be headlined by a title fight. One of the reasons that they let Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz kind of wish the BMF belt into existence was to justify headlining pay-per-views with something that was not a divisional title, but a belt was going to get wrapped around someone's waist. I'm following suit here. Conor McGregor has said that he wants to come back at UFC 300. It fits within the testing window. And he's been very insistent. His manager was saying it last week. He's been saying it himself. Dana has been saying that McGregor and Audiator are blowing up his phone wanting to fight on UFC 300. The obvious matchup would be McGregor versus Chandler. I mean, we've been waiting for that fight for almost 6 months now. But no, we're doing McGregor versus Gaethje for the BMF title.
Ooh, okay. I did not.
It's a more winnable fight for McGregor.
Yep. And that's bring the violence, and they don't like each other.
Nobody likes McGregor.
Yeah.
So it's likely to be a fantastic fight. It's winnable for McGregor. Gaethje gets clipped cleanly in all of his fights. Big left hand is kind of the last thing McGregor has. Even if Gaethje goes in as a big favorite, it's going to have tons of interest. It should be a good fight. The BMF belt either stays or moves. Again, as a hardcore fan, as a longtime fan, it wouldn't be my people's main event, but it's what you want on the marquee. It's what you want on the poster. It's what you want on the title.
But as a hardcore fan, I'm excited. I'd be excited to see that. I mean, I think that's gonna deliver, right? I mean, I think you would be excited as well, even though you don't think that's the mark. You may go with the traditional title, but I mean, I think that's one that would do. Any Justin Gaethje fight is going to deliver violence, particularly if somebody's willing to stand. And we know that's his route to victory, as you just mentioned, with his left hand. So,
do you want to know how unprecedentedly entertaining Justin Gaethje is? He has been in the UFC for 7 years now. He joined the UFC in 2017 out of the dissolution of World Series of Fighting, right before they turned into PFL. So he's been in the UFC for 7 years. In those 7 years, he has won the Sherdog year-end poll for Fight of the Year twice, and he's won Round of the Year 4 times. He's literally, including this year, I'll give it away. Gaethje versus Fiziev round 1 is Sherdog's Round of the Year for 2023. That's 4 times in 7 years. That's ridiculous.
That's insane. Yeah, he's going to deliver, and this is and you need the main event to deliver for UFC 300.
Yeah.
All right. So my main event. Now, when I look at UFC 300, and I'm thinking I'm the UFC, I don't only have to maximize my sales for UFC 300. I have to maximize my sales for UFC 300 and UFC 301. So I'm putting Conor McGregor versus Micheal Chandler on UFC 301 to get a big boost there. So what can I possibly do? And if I already have a co-main event between Islam and Olivera, who can be on that main fight? I'm going with Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis if he beats Sean Strickland. If he doesn't beat Sean Strickland, I'm going with Pereira for the light heavyweight title.
Oh, wow. Any of those possible permutations, sign me up, take my money right now.
Yeah. And what's exciting about both of the cards that we put together is you can still fill out, the rest of the fights for the year, the rest of the year. And it's still stacked. So with that said, let's rifle through the prelims. We got to fill out the prelims. We talked about the the top prelim. What are some of the other prelims you have on the fight card?
Well, I've approached it from my point of view, or from the point of view of what makes the perfect undercard for me. And I'm not that picky. Having fights is better than having no fights.
Sure.
But if I can avoid it, as few pink slip derbies as possible. If this is one of the biggest cards of the year, don't give me two fighters that are 1-3 and 2-5 in the UFC, and whoever loses is probably going to get cut.
Exactly.
Or, don't give me two people that are one fight removed from Dana White's Contender Series, unless one of them is someone that I'm about to mention. And don't give me any unranked heavyweights.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like no unranked heavyweight slobber knocker on my ideal.
You don't want Parker Porter, versus Jake Collier. Although if he beats him, it might get him.
Parker Porter has now been released by the UFC.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Look for him duking it out with Alan Belcher in bare knuckle boxing sometime soon.
That sounds absolutely dreadful. Yeah. All right,
it'll be terrible. Okay, so want me to just fire off a few of the ones I've got?
Yeah.
All right. He asked for it. I'm going to give him what he wants. Give me Cody Garbrandt versus Davison Figueiredo, 135.
Wow. Okay.
Garbrandt, if there's any interest in him right now, you want to rush him back to a title shot, the chin is still a problem. So you need to get him one or two big wins that you can justify thrusting him into the title picture. Figueiredo, he's one win away, so might as well make it Garbrandt, and then he can say he has a win against a former champ. And this fight was supposed to take place at 125 a couple of years ago and never panned out. I've got the UFC already said Bo Nickel versus Cody Brundage is on this card. We've been told it's the opening fight.
It's the opening fight.
Yeah, we've been told it's the opening fight. Obviously, if you've ever watched my show, you know that Bo Nickel is something between our totem animal and running joke, although we're not joking when Keith and I both think he is a serious prospect.
Sure.
So yeah, why not get him in the biggest event of 2024 against a guy that can't stop a takedown?
That's awesome.
Great.
Go ahead.
Oh no, like whatever you
go ahead. Do one more, and I'll give you 3.
Okay. He has asked to be the first and most likely only fighter to fight at UFC 100, 200, and 300.
Miller.
Give the man what he asked for. Give me Jim Miller versus Clay Guida.
There you go. And I like how that's a competitively appropriate fight as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a winnable fight, but it's appropriate. I think, it's great to have Clay Guida on there as well. Yeah. Somebody that has, a big fan base among the casuals as well. So I think I like that.
And now, the winner will probably be in possession of the all-time record for most cage time. Guida has it right now. Miller's close.
So. Wow. Yeah, so it gives something else, another talking point, a little more marketability for one of the fights that's, probably not going to deliver from excitement, but from nostalgia, it probably will.
If they do a 2-minute sizzle reel for them, I probably will shed tears. It's so much of my life as a mixed martial arts fan is wrapped up in their careers.
Yeah, and I like how you're building the prelims, because this fight card is so big. You want the real fights on the main card, but you got to have some nostalgia. You got to have a little bit of novelty, right? You got to have a little bit of everything on the prelim. So I like what you're doing, and we have some similarities. I have Jim Miller because, like you said, he's asked for it. I think he's earned it. I have him against Tony Ferguson. And I know you want him to retire. I think most people do. Or, I mean, maybe you don't talk about fighters retiring, but I think this is something where the UFC says, Tony, you can have your moment. This would be the right opportunity to retire, but we're going to give you that last one big fight in front of a big crowd, and I think that might be competitively appropriate as well.
And yeah, I'm always hesitant to say when fighters should retire.
Yeah.
But if the UFC were to say, okay, Tony, you're on UFC 300, and this is your last fight with us, win or lose, so you might as well give a speech, maybe that pushes him over the line. And if you're going to give him another fight, at least Jim Miller is unlikely to give him more CTE. You're not throwing him in there against, Nasrat Haqparast or Drew Dober or somebody that hits like a truck.
Yeah. You want something that's winnable and survivable. Although Jim Miller might sub him. You never know. But okay, so the other one, now I was with you. I actually was thinking about Bo Nickel about a week ago. And I didn't have a matchup. I was just thinking anybody, get one of your biggest prospects in there. That's interesting against Brundage. I mean, God, he'll probably, that might take him, 45 seconds?
But they can say Brundage was a college wrestler. And look what Nickel did to him. Even though Brundage is very much a karate fighter in the UFC,
Yeah.
he has the wrestling background.
Yeah, that's yeah. And then a third fight to throw at you on the prelim. Now I did Cody Garbrandt as well. Now I actually, so I had Garbrandt against a prospect that I wanted to, kind of get over the top. But I was listening to the Shillen and Duffy show, and I think Keith made a remarkable pick or suggestion against Dominic Cruz. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to steal Keith Schilling's suggestion here because it has all the nostalgia factors. It's, Cruz versus Garbrandt too. It gets the casuals excited. And I think, again, it's one of those ones that's competitively appropriate.
Yeah.
All right. So rifle off a couple more for me.
Well, I think I have just 3 more, so I'll toss them off if that's okay.
Yeah.
Give me a mid-level contenders fight that's likely to have fireworks. At 155, I have Rafael Fiziev versus Drew Dober.
Is Fiziev is his knee? Will it be better by then?
I'm operating on the assumption that it will be.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's funny. The only reason why I didn't put Fiziev on this card is I just wasn't sure about the knee. But if you're going to put anybody on the card, I mean, oh my God, Fiziev on a prelim. I mean, with that level of striking, I absolutely love it. And Drew Dober, yeah. I know you guys like to say on the Shillen and Duffy show, despite his body type, he is not a wrestler. And, that I'm excited about that if that goes down.
And if Fiziev isn't available, this is a fight to type. Like, give me
the lightweight division.
8 through 15 fringe contenders that are strikers by preference. So if it's Drew Dober and Bobby Green already fought, but you know what I mean? Just give me any 2 guys out of that hat and I'm happy. Awesome. Another one that's to type, though I'm glad that this is what it is. At 205, give me Carlos Ulberg versus Alonzo Menafield. And if Menafield had lost to Dustin Jacoby, last weekend, I would have said Ulberg versus Jacoby. You got 2 former professional kickboxers, guys that whoever wins, people will not be able to help but think, how would he do against Alex Pereira?
Yeah, exactly. And with those 2, I mean, you have a potential knockout. If Menafield will just follow up with a straight punch instead of trying to swing for the fence on every single,
he's gradually getting
just tap a little bit, and then get the hook. He got Jacoby wobbled so many times, and then he's just swinging these wild haymakers, and I'm like, wow, awesome. I like that. And what's your other one?
She should be ready to return by then. Give me Carla Esparza versus Tatiana Suarez.
Okay, yeah. Suarez is going against Amanda Lemos at UFC 7, but she might be ready,
right?
Yeah.
I meant the Suarez Lemos winner, and I just wrote Suarez.
Okay.
so yeah, there's an early piece of the Shillen and Duffy preview for UFC 297.
Yeah, you can just fast forward. You know where Ben's going with that, but I would.
Yeah. But yeah, Esparza versus the winner of that. It's time to kind of get another woman who's next at 115, and beating Esparza is a good way to set that up. Or if Esparza comes back from a year and 3 or 4 months of maternity leave and crushes a top 6 fighter, then hey, maybe she's back in the title picture. Yeah.
No, I love the matchmaking, and I mean, I think looking at your card, I mean, this would stack up. This would be probably the greatest fight card of all time. In my opinion, you probably have to go back to UFC 100 or some of the other big stacked ones. But I'm excited about all the fights. My last 3, again, because I like where you went with the action with Fiziev and Drew Dober, and I had something similar in mind with action. So I went with Benoit Saint Denis versus Bobby Green. Rest in peace, Bobby Green.
I mean, rest in peace, Bobby Green. But when the right Bobby Green shows up, he's just not an easy out for any striker.
You're right. You're right.
Benoit Saint Denis, where he's trending right, and I don't know where he'll top out. I don't know if he's a future champ. He's gonna be a top guy that hangs out in the top 10 for a while, but right now he feels like Justin Gaethje with an accent. That's a great comparison. Yeah, I haven't heard that, but that is spot on. I just thought of it now. Like,
what's that?
I just thought of it now, but yeah,
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, it's spot on. He brings the violence, and you know what? He's getting a pretty massive fight fan of following for this early in his career.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely love it. And so the other one, you know, again, if Mosvar wins and he goes against Max Holloway, I'm gonna because Giga was my replacement for Max Holloway. I'm gonna go with Giga versus Yusuf. Um,
I mean, yeah,
I think that would just be a pretty remarkable fight.
I agree. And especially because both of them have been a little inconsistent, but both of them have kind of a chip on their shoulder right now. And you know they're going to be out to prove something in their next fight. Like Yusuf has been extremely vocal about that. Just basically saying, yeah, I know I shit the bed in my last fight. You'll never see that out of me again.
And he has all the tools to adjust. I mean, it's really that cardio, right? If you know, I know he's cut a lot of weight. If he can somehow manage that, I mean, that guy's got all the talent in the world.
Yeah.
Now I have a couple. I have one more fight, and I don't even know how many fights. Oh no, I still have because I did a 15 fight card, and I put the two prelims. Like I said, this is where I'm putting Aljamain Sterling with against Calvin Kattar. I'm also and originally I did have Yuri Prochazka versus Rakic, and I did have that on the prelim. So that gives me one more to build a 15 fight card. And again, this is where try to bring in somebody new who's exciting, but use name value. I'm bringing, and you might have to help me pronounce his name, unless it's is it Sarah Bullet or Sarah Bullet?
Oh, Shara Bullet.
Yeah. Now, this guy's just, I think he has the type of personality and look that can appeal to a casual fan base who's kind of interesting and you know, has a pretty good striker. I know I've listened to your show. You're not as high on him as I am. I'm pretty excited to see him. So I put him against somebody who people probably want to see, but is, you know, kind of really should retire as well. I'm putting him against Chris Weidman. And so you have that little nostalgia, you know, you give him an opportunity to retire if he wants, but you also have this, you know, this up and comer where we don't know how good he is. I mean, is he or is he not? But I mean, he's fighting somebody that's not, you know, competitively high up right now, like Weidman.
No, that is a relatively safe matchup to find out what we really have in Shara Bullet.
Yeah.
And you know what? Yeah, I'm not as high on him as Keith and, you know, apparently as you, but the thing to keep in mind is I'm wrong a lot. So, you know, don't take too much from that, folks.
Unless you Keith pick the underdogs. I mean, you got a pretty good winning record there.
Yeah, like we do pretty well when we unanimously pick an underdog, but yeah, I mean, Shara Bullet, I don't want to go too far down that path, but yeah, it's going to be exciting for as long as he's here, because he's either going to win spectacularly or he's going to crash and burn badly.
And
against Chris Weidman, Shara Bullet is still a young, developing fighter. Like, he's not that young in age, but he has that prospect feel where if you look at his fights just 5-6 fights ago, he's not the same fighter he is now. So yeah, like he could put in a growing pains type performance and still get past Chris Weidman.
Yeah, and he's so excited. He's been so exciting against low level competition, you know. And I'd hate to say low level competition against, you know, Chris Weidman. That's, you know, kind of disrespectful. But he is at that stage where, you know, he's at that retirement stage, right? And it could be a highlight reel, and we want to see highlights for UFC 300, you know, with the nostalgia mixed in. So, like I said, Milo is going to join us later in the show, and he is going to give us his picks, or he's going to give us what he's going to build for UFC 300. But right now, what we're going to do is, we're going to talk to Ben about the Shillen and Duffy show, and we'll talk about how I became familiar with the Shillen and Duffy show. So the Shillen and Duffy show gives predictions and recaps, and if anyone is watching this show, you should absolutely watch it. And their target audience is really the hardcore fan. So if you're a hardcore fan, they get more technical than we do. You know, it's funny, it's intelligent, it's a good show. And how I got into it is, you know, I've always been a casual fan, a casual MMA fan until the pandemic. I mean, I've watched every UFC event up until, I mean, from UFC 1 all the way through, but it was always more casual. Mm-hmm. But right when the pandemic, I mean, I needed something to watch. And the UFC was that sport. And as I became more and more ingrained into it, as I become more and more interested, I needed more technical knowledge. And so I'm looking at these different podcasts. And if I look at the ESPN podcasts, they're kind of high level, not really that interesting. And if I look at some of them, I came across the Shilling and Duffy show, and it was exactly what I wanted. And it was so spot on in terms of analysis, and in terms of, not only the picks, but just how the show is, how it's operated, how it's run, and it's pretty damn funny. You guys are pretty funny, and so I would definitely recommend it.
I appreciate the kind words, because everything you're saying kind of feels like goals achieved for me. It's what we hope to deliver. So if it's working and it helped one person develop from a casual fan into a really committed fan into somebody who's actually getting into this on the creative side, then I couldn't be prouder of what we've done.
Yeah, and I think you're attracting a lot more than one. I mean, Keith Shilling was mentioning now he's going to events. People are saying, "Hey, Shilling and Duffy show," and we're going to leave a link on to the Shilling and Duffy show. So all of you watching, you really need to check it out. It is really good, and make sure to subscribe and like their video as well, and click the bell so you're notified. When their next show happens. Now, it's interesting, and Ben knows the story to an extent. So I met Keith Shilling in Hawaii. I go to Hawaii frequently, at least, try to get there twice a year. And I was watching a fight at a restaurant. And so the Shilling and Duffy show, I literally watch twice a week. It's, my favorite podcast. And I walked past Keith, and I'm like, I recognized him right away. And I said, I kind of paused, and I said, "Is your name Keith?" And he's all, looks at me a little surprised, like, "Yeah. What's your last name?" He's like, "Shilling." "Oh, no way. I watch your show." And he invited me to sit down with him and his wife and watch the entire fight card. And I got to say, he's one of the coolest persons I've ever met in my life. He also tries to play dumb on the Shilling and Duffy show. He is not dumb. He's very intelligent. He's a detective in real life. Smart guy, funny guy. And I got to say, it was such a privilege to sit there and watch the fight with him, because he's so knowledgeable, and I was able to learn so much. And the reason, so it was a lot of fun, but I did want to give him some props first, because now I want to bag on him a little bit and say, Ben, how many times per episodes does he interrupt you?
Oh, if you place the over under at 10, you'd be hitting the, both. But the thing is, it doesn't bother me, and in the flow of things, I don't even notice. It really does just feel like sitting with a friend and talking. And we fell into it because, I had just fell into the podcasting side of things. I'd been writing for Sherdog for a while, and they just needed somebody. And then, Keith had done an independent podcast, and we kind of brought him on board. But after, going on 4 years now of talking 6 hours a week with the guy, it really does just feel like sitting and talking to a friend. So I really don't notice when he interrupts me, except that he will mention that he interrupted me. Sorry for interrupting you. Well, you would have gotten away with it if you hadn't said anything.
I think setting the over and under at 10 is appropriate per pick. But no, anyways, you do have a good flow, and you guys do have great chemistry. And that's one of the things I noticed, right away. And one of the reasons why, I enjoy watching the show. Now, with that said, we're going to move into our next segment. As you know, we do a segment, Kicking It with Milo. We're going to do that still later when he joins us. And Ben's not going to be on. Ben, do you have a question for Milo that you'd like to ask for Kicking It with Milo?
It's not a simple, short question, but if he wants to talk a little bit about surfing, I'd love to hear about it. Like, I've never lived anywhere where surfing was a thing. Like, I grew up on the East Coast. I now live fairly close to the Gulf Coast. Surfing is not a big thing either place. Too cold on the East Coast, too full of jellyfish down here. So yeah, I just want to kind of hear about how long he's done it, what got him into it, whether he has any actual competitive aspirations or he just likes to do it for fun. The worst injury he's ever had surfing. Just talk to me about surfing for a minute.
And he'll like that. And in terms of where he is competitively, he's one of the best competitive surfers in the United States. I mean, he's top.
Oh.
Yeah, he's he just competed in in a contest last week, and it was where all the best kids from all over the United States got together. He's winning contests. He's pretty high level, or actually
Wow.
extremely. Yeah, he's beating kids a lot older than him, so he's right there. So he'll be happy to tell you that. But to let all of our listeners know, yeah, Milo's the real deal. And the reason why we're recording this a little bit later is he texted me 30 minutes before we were about to go on, and he said, "I'm still at the beach. He just got out of the water." By the way, that was 5:30 p.m. and it's dark, so he's pretty committed. But yeah, he'll be happy to answer any of those questions. So thanks for asking that. We're gonna do a segment called "Kicking It with Ben." So Ben, I know you're in a band, and tell us a little bit about your band. But before, what's your favorite punk band of all time?
Oh, well, it's an easy answer, but I go with The Clash. Just the constant innovations, so many different styles they touched over a short career, really did everything they could to make it so punk rock, quote unquote, wouldn't all sound the same. Like, they failed at that. Punk rock does mostly sound the same now, but it's not The Clash's fault. Absolutely remarkable band, but not all my tastes are quite that old school. Like, I grew up and listening to a lot of kind of 90s and aughts, like kind of American skate punk and hardcore.
Pennywise, Bad Religion.
Yeah, I mean, Bad Religion was one of the most important bands to me formatively, even if I've lost the plot a little bit. Pennywise was the standby of all those 90s and early aughts Warped Tours that I went to and died of dehydration every summer. Yeah, I love Agent Orange. Yeah, you're rattling off a lot of my favorite bands. But I mean, in terms of punk rock, my tastes are both deep and wide. Like, I like a lot of kind of the weird post-punk and post-hardcore stuff. I like just regular hardcore. I like old school punk. I like new stuff. It's all good.
Awesome. And what genre is, with that punk influence, is your band? Is it a punk band, or is it a little bit different, or what's your genre?
I'm in two bands, and anyone who is looking at me right now, and this is the same angle, the same backdrop when I'm on the Shillin' and Duffy show, they see that acoustic guitar right there, and they're like, "Oh, who is this doofus?" But if I lean,
there we go.
There is a rack of 6 or 7 electrics at any given time.
Wow.
The punk band I'm in is called Action Frank, and it is speedy skate punk. It is,
awesome.
I don't know, I would say Green Day songs at no effect speed.
Like, I love it. I love it.
Fast. And kind of like snotty vocals with harmonies behind them. I do the backup vocals, and of the 2 guitar players, I'm probably the lead guitar player. Like, I'm the guy that takes the solos and stuff. And yeah, real good time. If you ever want to hear 17 songs in 30 minutes, come see Action Frank.
Hey, and we'll leave a link for all of you to check out. And I mean, I love punk too. Like, I've seen Pennywise live at. I mean, a lot of the punk bands, growing up in Southern California, they'll play at different surf events and stuff like that. Like, where you might have a premiere of a surf brand will have a video, and some of these bands will play. I've seen Agent Orange like 4 times. Just at local bars down here.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. I love 90s like skate punk and stuff like that. So I'm actually pretty excited to listen to your music. So we will definitely put in a link there. Ben, how did 2 questions? How did you get into MMA?
Well, I mean, and actually, I am in 2 bands.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'll just say real quick. My other band is called Bayou Saints, like Bayou, like the bayous that flow through Houston. Yeah. Bayou Saints, and it is more of a heavy alt rock with some slight psychedelic touches. Like, I would say Queens of the Stone Age, Dinosaur Jr., Foo Fighters type thing.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And that's a very different thing for me, because most of my bands over the years have been loud, fast rules. So it's kind of cool to play in a band that's more, atmospheric and melodic and slow and heavy sometimes. And we just finished recording our first full-length album. It's in the middle of being mixed right now, and I'm sure some of those tracks will be used as interstitial music on the Shillin' and Duffy show once they're ready to go.
Well, congratulations on putting that together, and we will leave a link to that as well. So 2 more questions for you. And who is your favorite UFC fighter?
Currently or of all time?
How about both?
Now that I work in the field professionally, I kind of make it a point not to have favorite fighters. I try to approach things with a certain amount of detachment, but at the same time, if you ever listen to my show, you'll hear me say, I know this guy personally. I've been to his gym a lot. Like, take my pick here for what it's worth. So it's easier for me to talk about the fighters that were my favorites coming into things. And for me, the first fighter that I saw fight that made me go, okay, I like this thing and I want to see more of that is Frank Mir. He was my first favorite fighter. And getting to interview him a couple years ago was kind of a bucket list thing for me.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, like Frank Mir was my first favorite fighter. I liked a lot of the Pride guys. They just all seemed like superheroes / demigods just fighting over there in that white ring lit from above. It looked like a movie about fighting where the UFC looked like dudes fighting in a cage with not as good production values at the time. So, I mean, young Shogun.
He has probably the meanest ground and pound I've ever seen. You get that guy on top. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
And Shogun was an absolute beast.
Yeah. Gomi, Takanori Gomi back in the day, all of kind of their lighter weight fighters and, the ones that passed through there were just incredible at the time, like Joachim Hansen that, just kind of faded away quickly. We never really got to see him do his thing over in the States. These days, I'm a fan of Styles. I will say, I like watching this guy fight, so I hope he wins at least enough to stick around.
So so given that you are being careful about talking about your a potential bias there, which and I do like the show. You mentioned, hey, I know this guy and he's a Texas guy, and I know him, I've seen him, so it's hard for me to assess this accurately. I mean, I think a lot of people do that, so I think that's awesome. So with that said, who we won't ask you about who you like the most or who's your favorite current fighter. Who is the one fighter that you're like, I want to talk about this guy because I'm going to find this fight exciting. And I hope he fights and I'm excited to watch him, even though I'm not assessing it yet.
I love talking about Max Holloway fights.
Beautiful.
Just, love talking about Max Holloway fights. And I'm always a little bit of a sucker for fighters who feel like a throwback specialist. Like for that time a couple years ago when Ryan Hall just kept mystifyingly winning fights in the UFC, I was like, this rules. How is this guy doing a spinning back kick, a flop butt scoot, and beating top 25 fighters with it? Like, how is he doing that in 2018? This feels like 1996. Like, what is going on here? So I'm always a sucker for old school specialists that somehow make it work in the modern game.
Wow. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I had one more question. I totally forgot what it was, so I'm going to just ask something on the fly. What is your favorite fight of all time that you watched and you're like, wow, I could watch that one again? I thought that was the best fight I've ever seen.
It's funny because some of the fights that instantly come to mind don't have the rewatch value. Like if I watched Sakuraba versus Newton for the first time today, I'd be like, I mean, that was good. Even if I watched Couture versus Hizzo for the first time today, I'd be like, yeah, that was a pretty good fight. The one guy's kind of smallish, the skill level isn't quite what it's at. Like, how do you not know how to check leg kicks? But those are such a formative part of. I mean, they're the reason that I'm watching.
It has
Zhang versus Jan Jacek or Prochazka versus Teixeira today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think probably my two favorite fights of all time, not adjusting for time period, would be Zhang versus Jan Jacek 1 and Prochazka versus Teixeira.
Yeah, I mean, those are right there. Those were two of the best fights. I mean, the former is the best female fight I've ever seen. Yeah. That was no doubt. And the Teixeira and Yuri fight was so back and forth. Where do you rank that against Shogun and Hendo?
Because the stakes are higher. That's the tiebreaker for me.
Gotcha.
It's the same as when I'm voting in the Sherdog year-end polls on my submission of the year, knockout of the year. There has to be stakes and contest. If all I wanted to see was some dude getting knocked out cold, I can go to World Star.
Yeah.
Like 95% of the fights end in a knockout, and the other 5% end with like the cops pulling up. Like, but it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So the slightly higher stakes make me lean towards Prochazka Teixeira.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And before we conclude with Ben Duffy, I just want to let all of you know, stick around. Milo is going to be up next, and he is going to give us his picks for UFC 300. And again, when it comes to Milo, you never know what he's going to do. He's really good at picking fights. Matchmaking, we shall see. But Ben, thank you so much for coming on today. I mean, it was an honor to have you on. I mean, you're truly an artist in your craft. I mean, both as a writer and as a host. I know you're a humble guy. Both you and Keith are great. Again, everybody, please take a moment, look at the link below, check out their show. It's really good. It will give you some more technical details on every fight prediction, any prediction show or recap show. So again, thank you so much. Really grateful to have you on.
It's been my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you, Ben. All right, Ben has left, but Milo has joined us. Milo, I know you're an expert when it comes to picking fight cards, but are you good at constructing them? What do you think will make the perfect fight card for UFC 300? And to let all of you know, Milo's just given us the main card. He's not doing any predictions. He just sticks with the big stuff. He doesn't want to be bothered with prelims and so forth. So Milo, how would you build UFC 300?
Okay, so I'm just doing the main card, but for my first fight, I'm gonna do Moreno versus Albazi. I know this fight's already happening, but I don't really care. I want to see it anyways.
So you're gonna pull
yeah,
off the card in Mexico, and you're gonna put that on UFC 300.
exactly. It'll be a really entertaining fight. So yeah.
It would definitely be appropriate for UFC 300, and it's funny you weren't on, but I mentioned the list to the listeners. I said Ben and I are going to really look at creating a fight card that's doable. That's something the UFC would do, taking into consideration all the other fights planned. And I said, I don't know if Milo will do that. He might match up Weili versus John Jones. Who knows? And so right out the gate, you're matching up Moreno versus Albazi in a fight that's already booked, but you want the UFC to move it. So that's your opener. What would be the second fight?
Okay, so like in order for this fight to work, Sean Strickland would have to lose to Dricus Du Plessis. So I'm gonna put Dricus Du Plessis against Khamzat Chimaev for my second fight.
So you're going with Khamzat straight to the title.
Yep.
Wow.
Sure.
And that's your second fight. Now I'm curious about, and that actually is a doable fight. So that is, that's something that can happen. So now, all right, the suspense is building. What's your third from the top?
I was kind of debating that these last three fights are like the best fights the UFC could make. So I put Islam versus Charles for my second to last fight. I mean third to last fight.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah.
And then
that will be will be one of the fights of the year for sure.
Yeah, and then what? Okay, and so wow, that's pretty crazy that's your third from the top. What's your co-main event?
My co-main is Izzy versus Pereira 2. So yeah.
Izzy versus
three.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in my picks because I did something similar. I that's the main event. It's if Dricus Du Plessis wins, I want Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, and if he loses, I would take Pereira versus I would take Pereira versus Adesanya for that top. But that's the co-main event. So what is your main event?
A lot of people have been saying this, but I don't think this fight cannot happen. I think Conor versus Chandler, it has to happen. So yeah.
Wow. So that's and I think a lot of people are I think a lot of people are expecting this fight to take place at UFC 300. See, I made the argument that I think it should be made at UFC 301 because if you're the UFC, you need to sell UFC 300 and 301 together. Everybody's going to be watching 300. Use your biggest star, Conor McGregor, for that next fight. But I think that's great. That's a stacked card. That's really exciting. So there you have it. Those are the picks that Milo had for UFC 300. All right, now we're ready for one of our sections, Kicking It with Milo. So, Milo, Ben, even though he had to leave, he had a couple questions for you. He wanted to know how you got into surfing and also what's your biggest injury?
Oh, how I got into surfing? I don't know. My dad kind of I wanted to surf like my dad, so I just started surfing and he pushed me in the waves and stuff. And then, yeah, it just went on from there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was your what injuries have you had? I don't even remember you having an injury.
Surfing at Waco, the wave pool.
Wave pool, wow.
Yeah, I like my board, there's fins on my board, and the fin went right into my leg on my shin, and it just went right into my shin. And my
Oh,
trip was luckily it was at the end of my trip, so it was like perfect timing, and I was done.
wow, and it lacerated, it cut it, right? Like cut it open.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it
remember
was
that.
bad.
Yeah, I remember your dad was telling me about that. Yeah, it's crazy how some of our biggest injuries can come from our own surfboards. My question is, where's your sense of responsibility? Our podcast starts at 6. We have a special legendary guest. It's dark already, and you text me, can we do it at 6:30 because I'm still at the beach?
Oh yeah, the waves were firing. I had to stay down. I don't know, it was just too good. But yeah,
Wow, I joked with Ben that this is this is the price we pay for doing a podcast with a 16-year-old up and coming surfer. So
for sure.
yeah, so awesome. All right, we get to our final section. It is called Kook of the Week. Milo, who is your Kook of the Week?
I think I'm gonna have to give it to the rain because it's been making the ocean dirty, and there's trash floating around the ocean. So yeah,
Oh, that's disgusting. So you're out in the rain at night surfing, and therefore you were late to this podcast. So
exactly.
all right, my kook of the week is I'm still going to go with Colby Covington just because I mean he is the personification of a kook, just a complete moron. So Colby Covington, you get it in back-to-back weeks. You're catching up to Milo's dad for winner of the most kook of the week honors. And with that said, Milo, do you have a last word?
Drop the mic.
We're out.